Hello, casuals and challengers. My name is TBSky, and League of Legends is one video game. One video game with a very big world and 141 champions in it. Given the sheer size of this universe they've built, with its many regions, cultures, mythologies, and characters, it's perhaps not surprising that one of my most consistent criticisms of Riot is that they don't put out nearly enough content outside of the main game to make that world feel alive. Runeterra is a huge and vibrant world full of magic and adventure, but most of the time it feels like not a lot is really happening in there. Characters and the stories are released, they establish themes and plot threads, and then they lay dormant for years and years as Riot move their focus to the next project. So how do you manage to make a world that big feel alive and vibrant? Well, I've suggested lots of things in the past. More audio dramas, more comics, ongoing stories, novelizations, but all of my suggestions ultimately come down to the same thing. Let us spend time in Runeterra. Give us opportunities to be in that world, to see it firsthand. And if you can do that, then even if not very much actually changes during the time you spend there, the world will still feel alive and present to the audience. This is how you make fictional worlds feel real. Now, all media has the power to transport its audience when it's done well, but no medium has this power in greater abundance than gaming. So today, I'm going to suggest 10 games that Riot could, and I think should, make in the League of Legends universe. The first 5 of these games are going to be just for fun games, that is, not heavy on story, not heavy on lore, but just an opportunity to play in the Runeterra sandbox, to spend time in the world, even if you don't have to learn much about it. The other 5 are going to be for world building and lore, games through which Riot can deepen their world and expand their universe, and perhaps even advance some of the stories of their champions. Now, I've deliberately chosen game types and genres that can be produced with relatively, and I do mean relatively, game development is never as easy, as cheap, or as, cost efficient as people think, but that can be produced with relatively few resources. None of these are meant to be AAA full-featured mega productions. None of them are meant to rival League of Legends itself for scale. They are games that, at least theoretically, can be executed by relatively small teams of people working with relatively limited resources. Number 1. Shoot 'em up. Shoot 'em up is a very versatile genre. It can mean everything from the scrolling shooters of games like Galaga or Ikaruga to the arena shooters of something like Smash TV. To give you an example, one of my favorite games in the shoot-'em-up genre is a relatively well-known game from back in the 90s called Raptor Call of the Shadows, and it took the shape of, it was a shareware game back in those days, and it took the shape of several acts, each composed of, I think it was 9 levels, where you fly over an area for a while, shooting down enemies, gathering up points, eventually fighting a boss, and ending the game, and between each playthrough of the level, you went back to a central hub area where you could save, you could buy upgrades for your ship, you could make repairs, and all that kind of stuff. Now, that basic model would be relatively simple to slot in a character like Corki, flying through levels, taking down enemies, earning experience points and gold that you can use to upgrade yourself in between levels, kind of mimicking the way that you buy items and gain levels in the main game. And the point of these for fun games is not so much to create any kind of compelling narrative or to drive anything forward in any particular way, but just to give us an opportunity to spend more time being Corki, doing Corki things. Or, to give another example, a game like Smash TV, which is perhaps best described as a horde/arena shooter where you basically occupy a room while enemies come at you from all sides, and you pick up power-ups and you shoot them and you try to stay alive as long as possible. To give you an idea for a premise, maybe Ezreal is exploring some kind of tomb, he sets off a trap, and all of a sudden, hundreds of enemies are coming at him because they've been unleashed by some ancient curse. Or maybe you're Lucian out hunting down the undead and you get trapped in a room by Thresh and you have to fight your way out. There really doesn't need to be much of a story behind it. Again, it's just an opportunity to use some of the mechanics, some of the tropes that are already established in League of Legends itself to have some fun with a different game mode. Number 2. Infinite Runner. Here I'm thinking specifically of games like Cannibalt or Robot Unicorn Attack, essentially side-scrolling infinite runners where the majority of the gameplay is about overcoming obstacles, jumping at the right time, and finding a particular kind of rhythm while picking up certain collectibles. Characters like Kha'Zix or Rengar, who have both mobility and jumps in their kits, would lend themselves well to this type of thing. And if you need some kind of a premise, well, maybe it is Rengar chasing down various bits of prey that he's hunting, or Kha'Zix doing the same thing, or hell, maybe it's Kha'Zix and Rengar chasing each other down, depending on exactly who you're playing, and it's some kind of time trial mode where you have to overcome a certain level of difficulty in order to catch up to your opponent. Once again, the premise doesn't really matter so much as it matters to give you some kind of feeling of playing this character doing something that this character would be doing over the course of their, air quotes, normal life, i.e. running, jumping, chasing something down, gathering things up that they need, that kind of thing. Number 3, roguelike. Now, when I say roguelike here, I'm thinking specifically of, games that are actually like the original Rogue. That is to say, randomly generated dungeon exploring games with permadeath, where you get one opportunity to explore a particular map and find items that make you stronger and more capable of handling opponents. Again, a character like Ezreal, whose natural state of being involves exploring random places, ties very nicely into these sorts of mechanics. But you could also be someone like, for instance, Garen, who has to hunt down mages in their underground lairs or stuff like that, or Nidalee, exploring various unusual parts of her jungle. Characters from Sawn, like for instance Echo or indeed Twitch, exploring the various underground laboratories and abandoned buildings in that particular region, would also lend themselves very naturally to this kind of exploration. And the value of doing something like this is that it would allow you to create a visual universe for these particular areas of the League of Legends world. A tile set for Sawn, a tile set for ancient Shriman tombs, which you could explore as Sivir, come to think of it, or a tile set for, what a mage hideout would look like in Demacia. Even if you're not really getting any story content, you can still get a sense of what this world is like, what moving through it is like, the kinds of things that you might come upon. And without having to expend a monstrous amount of resources, you can do a lot of visual world building for just the kinds of aesthetics, the kinds of environments that your world produces. Number 4. Rhythm game. This is relatively self-explanatory, but League of Legends has always had a very rich musical universe thanks to the many talented musicians that Riot have been smart enough to employ to work on their game. And this right here, even if you're only reusing music that has already been created for League of Legends, having some kind of rhythm game that allows you to pick a character and have them dance in time to the music, that alone is just a wonderful and compelling way to be within the world. Alternatively, you could even base it on a skin line like, for instance, Pentakill, or have something like Sona's Edval Hero, where your job is to play a concert for an expecting crowd that is out in front of you, and you get paid based on how well you do, and you hit for a high score. Rhythm games are inherently compelling just through their mechanics and through the opportunity that they give you to listen to nice music. This, to me, seems like kind of a no-brainer. Number 5. Platforming side-scroller. This again is relatively self-explanatory, and really it's the kind of thing that seems would be fun to do just because League of Legends has so many interesting and fun jumping mechanics. Both Tristana and characters like Ziggs have interesting ways to get themselves across walls, or a character like Talon would also be kind of ideal for something like this. Now, if you remember the comic that Riot put out, Ziggs and Jinx Paint the Town, essentially details Jinx and Ziggs going on a bit of an explosive rampage across Piltover, ultimately ending up with Ziggs having to stop Jinx from actually blowing up a building with people inside it, because that is one step too far for him. He's okay just blowing up inanimate objects that can't feel pain, but he draws the line at actually killing people. That kind of makes for a compelling premise for a platforming video game. Imagine a game where you are Ziggs and you have to navigate the rooftops of Piltover in order to catch up with Jinx before she blows up some important landmark full of people inside it. And all you really have to do is to get from one end of the level to the other, kind of in the same way that you do in a game like Super Mario Bros, or indeed many of the custom Mario Maker levels would be a good inspiration for this sort of thing. And there really wouldn't need to be much of a narrative. There really wouldn't need to be much of anything. It's just an opportunity to explore interesting jump mechanics in another setting than Summoner's Rift. So, those are the 5 for fun games. Games that are mostly just about exploring fun mechanics from League of Legends in other genre settings. And if you are a Rioter and you're listening to me pitch you this, one of the questions you're probably going to have is, well, but what's really the virtue of doing that? What's really the value that you're adding by doing that? You're just proposing slapping our own characters into already established genres without making any fundamental changes to what those genres really mean, without, shaking up the landscape, without causing a shift, without bringing a really truly new original idea to the table. To which I say yes, because this is not about doing anything new. This is not about shaking up anything. It's not about putting your own spin on things. It's not about being unique. It's about giving your audience opportunities to play in your world. It's about giving them opportunities to embody your characters. It's about giving them another way to fall in love with the world of Runeterra. Speaking of which, let's move on to the second half of the list, which is all about world building and lore. Number 6, visual novels. Now, when I say a visual novel, I mean the full spectrum of all the stuff that visual novel-style gameplay embodies. Whether that is the quasi-adventure game stylings of a Phoenix Wright game, or a dating sim, or indeed just a traditional visual novel narrative where you go through and essentially choose your own adventure by picking different dialogue options. Now, I don't think I need to explain why a visual novel is good for telling lore or doing world building, because the story is kind of the point of the visual novel. The gameplay is rarely the specific attraction when it comes to visual novels. It's about experiencing characters going through some kind of narrative or a story. And yeah, obviously genres like visual novels are perfect for fan service games, that is, a dating sim set in the Academy universe or with the Star Guardians, or some kind of visual novel where you get to hang out with all the characters of Son as they do youth gang stuff in the Undercity. But you can also do very serious lore explorations. For an example, a visual novel about Garen investigating the presence of mages in the higher echelons of Demacian society, and Lux desperately trying to hide the fact that she is in fact a mage. And depending on the choices the player makes, you can have multiple endings. One where Garen finds himself forced to execute his own sister, one where she gets exiled from the city and has to leave, and maybe one canonical good ending where Garen does learn the truth about his sister, but he manages to avoid any kind of consequences coming to harm her. One of the things visual novels do very well is character drama, and stories like Garen and Lux's have plenty of character drama to go around, but really any other group of characters in the League of Legends universe for whom the drama is primarily emotional would suit themselves really, really well to the visual novel format. Number 7. Classic JRPG. Now here I'm talking about your real classic, your sprite-based overworld with random battles kinds of JRPGs. Not necessarily to the scale of your Final Fantasies, not with, massive overworlds and multiple world states and multiple characters, each with their own story arcs, but something simple, small, and focused. In fact, to my mind, the ideal format for this would be to not actually have champions be a primary part of the main narrative, rather have them be characters that are encountered by the party over the course of the story. And the place I would go with this is to have, for instance, the player play as a squad of soldiers from Noxus, who are out carrying out orders for the Noxian army when they get swept up into some kind of slightly grander narrative. Maybe something to do with corruption in the ranks of the Noxian army that they have to uncover and report to Swain. Or maybe you can play as a group of traders in Shurima who have to make their way across the treacherous desert dealing with bandits and random monster encounters. Maybe you fight Rek'Sai as a boss fight at some point. Or hell, maybe you are a farmer in Ionia when the Noxians invade and burn down your home, and so you set out to join the army of Aurelia, and you get swept up in all kinds of internal Ionian politics as you try to fight back the invading Noxian army and try to figure out what direction Ionia should take at this point moving forward. There's all kinds of interesting perspectives you could take from the somewhat more ordinary people of Runeterra, with whom the champions at some point during the story will interact, but without making the champions and their perspectives the focus of the story. Number 8. Management Sim. What's it like to be an inventor in Piltover, creating things and selling them to people based on their needs? What's it like being a farmer in Ionia? What's it like running an assassin's guild in Noxus? Management sims aren't traditionally super heavy on story, but something that they can do extremely excellently is world building, because fundamentally a management sim is an opportunity to integrate yourself into a system underpinning a particular world. Whether that be economics, banking, trade, food production, some kind of social interaction. Maybe you can run a bar in Son. Maybe you can run a tourist agency in Piltover. But whatever system you ask ask the players to integrate themselves into the end result that the player is going to come away with is a much greater understanding of how that part of the world works, which kinds of people interact with it, how do the characters in the world feel about it, how does it affect their lives, how, in other words, is this world built? Number 8, walking simulator. Now, just to get this on the record, I don't really like calling them walking simulators, but that seems to be the term that we've all settled on for, the narrative-driven exploration games. But a game like this would be uniquely well-suited to a champion like Annie, whose entire plot structure right now just involves her wandering around the wilderness, sometimes encountering people, getting a bit of food and water from them, listening to their stories, learning who they are, and eventually abandoning them. Alternatively, a character like Lulu would lend herself very well to this, just walking through the fairy tale worlds that she's inhabiting as a yordle, where the main point might not be so much to explore any kind of grand narrative, but rather to give the players an opportunity to see firsthand what it's like to, first of all, be a yordle, a character type that is relatively underexplored in League of Legends right now, and second of all, to learn what it's like to be Lulu specifically, a yordle who's already a magical creature who, on top of that, has been lured into some kind of bizarre fairy world where her imagination makes things literally real. Number 10, adventure game. Now, when I say adventure game, I mean both the classic point-and-click style of a LucasArts or a Double Fine adventure game, but also the more modern storytelling, character-focused Telltale games. And like in the RPG, my recommendation for something like this would be to not necessarily explore the lives of any individual champion, but to pick a character who lives in the world and exploring what it's like to be them within that context. You could tell stories about political intrigue and power brokers in Noxus, or what it's like to try and survive as a street kid in the slums of Son. And places like Son and Piltover would actually lend themselves uniquely well to point-and-click adventure games where, the whole point of that particular genre is to pick up random bits and bobs all over the world and put them together in inventive ways to create some kind of solution to a problem. Being an inventor. So, that's the end of my list. And just to reiterate, the point isn't that any of these games have to be 10 out of 10 Game of the Year winning prizes at the Game Awards. The point is to reach outside the confines of Summoner's Rift and allow the players to be part of the world of Runeterra in ways that the main game just doesn't allow. Riot have been promising for years now that someday the S in Riot Games would no longer be just a letter, but outside of arcade experiments like Cho'Gath Eats the World or Blitzcrank's Poro Roundup and the Mechs vs. Minions board game, they've never really made good on that promise. I'm sure they're working on stuff, but since none of that has ever materialized to us, I can't really give them credit for it yet. And the point I was trying to get at in this video isn't just about Riot and League of Legends. It's also, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to have some grand and singular vision for every one of your projects. You don't need to set the world on fire or redefine all the genres. Write a 3-act romance novel between star-crossed lovers succeeding against all odds. Draw a webcomic about 2 dudes sitting on a couch playing video games. Make your first video game a roguelike. Now, I'm not saying don't be critical of genre convention, and I'm not saying don't be original. I'm just saying that we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and you should never be afraid to take advantage of the work that's been done by the people who came before you. And I want to give you the benefit of my experience when I say that at the end of a project, you will always have to settle for good enough. Because no matter how good your work is, it is in the nature of the creative mind to imagine better. So never convince yourself to see that as a failure. Finished is always better than perfect. Oh boy, so that little last part of the video is something I added after I had spent like 2 or 3 days going over this goddamn video over and over again, trying to record the different pieces of it and edit it together, and I was so frustrated with it not being perfect, and eventually I just decided, no, listen, you've been here before, dude. You've been here before where something is just not going quite right, and you're refusing to see it as being good enough. And that's really destructive and bad, so now it's finished, it's done, it's out there. Thank you very much for watching it. I assume you've watched it all the way through, not just skipped ahead to the end. If you are so inclined, there is a subscribe button down below the video that you can click on, and I would be very grateful. There's also a like button, which I recommend that you click on, because I hear if you click the like button enough times, it breaks open and candy falls out. And if you are so inclined, you can head on over to Patreon, where you can support this channel, and you gain access to a number of perks, including access to the channel Discord, where we hang out, we chat about stuff, we shoot the shit, we have fun. And also, you can get art from me or commission a video for me sometime in the future, which, you know, that's the option, thing you can do. I would be very grateful, but of course, if you can't, that is 110% okay. And finally, you can click the dislike button down below to go and watch my video about the top 10 reasons why you shouldn't click the dislike button down below. Number 8 may surprise you. Thank you very much for watching.